take it away, Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I just unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to do the share screen, so everybody cross your fingers. Spinny wheel of death. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. What do you guys see?
We see your slides, but go to show and it should show your slideshow.
Okay, I did click on that. Okay. We good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Amelia said, and it's really wonderful to see both you and Matt. I'm Kelly Kryc. I'm currently the Director of Ocean Policy at New England Aquarium. I went ahead and, since this is a career talk, I put down all of my current positions. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Georgetown University, where I teach science policy, and I have a consulting company. So I'm putting all of this out there in the event that you want to ask questions about any one of these things. And so I'm going to fly through a bunch of this because I'm really, you know, I'm sitting here in a room talking at a computer, and so I'd much rather talk to all of you. So we're going to go through this, and then I really look forward to talking to all of you. So I am immediately having problems advancing. Let's try this. Okay. This is the big overview with the who am I, what do I do, and how did I get here, which are a lot of the questions that I often get from people who are interested in transitioning from a traditional academic career into something else. And what I can tell you is I've tried almost all of the something else's. So as Amelia mentioned, I am a scientist first, and in fact, that's, you know, when they ask me when I'm going into a new country, what's your job, what's your position, I always say scientist, because I think primarily that is what I am as fundamentally and at a basic level. I have at different points in time described myself as a geologist or an oceanographer, a paleoceanographer, a climate scientist, or a geochemist, depending on the audience. And each one of those things means a different thing to different people and has been meaningful in a policy context as well. So that's why I wanted to specify what kind of scientist I am. When I transitioned into the policy sector, I've worked both on domestic and international energy and environmental policy. I've done that through the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. I've done that at the US State Department, at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and at the US Department. I have at times found myself unemployed. We'll get in a little bit into that too. And so I have a consulting company that has carried me through those times and has allowed me to be a little bit flexible as I've made different decisions. As I mentioned, I'm a professor at Georgetown University, and that comes into play as I go through a little bit of my career, because I actually never wanted to be in academia, hence why I'm doing what I'm doing now. But it's one of my favorite things to do, and that was a completely unexpected twist in my career trajectory. I'm the Director of Ocean Policy at New England Aquarium. I'll talk about that. And in a previous career, the one between academia and policy, I worked in science program management in both nonprofit and at a philanthropy. And so I think if I'm taking stock of what I've done, the one missing piece for me is the private sector. And I'm not sure I'm gonna check that box off, because I'm not sure it's of interest, but that is an option for any one of you as you're considering alternate careers beyond academia. Okay. Oh, you know what, before I advance, let's see. The picture of Antarctica is the one without Amelia. That was taken on the Marianne Dufresne. The one with the little fisheye bubble, that's me and Alvin, which was super amazing. Let's see, the one where I'm actually dressed like a professional is me at the White House with President Obama's dogs. And the one is me on top of Kilimanjaro. So there's only one of those that wasn't done professionally, and that's Kilimanjaro, but it's still a moment that I'm really proud of. Okay. All right, so some of the questions that I commonly get, in addition to the who are you, what did you do, and how did you get there, is the specific path I took in science, and then what role did science play in the professional roles, so the transitions that I've taken. And then a really common question I get asked is a PhD necessary for the jobs that I've done and had? And then, oh, look, the numbers are all off. That's because I was doing this earlier today. Sorry about that. Something that Amelia wanted me to speak to is kind of some of the hard and soft skills that have helped me most professionally. And some of those I picked up in my scientific training. Okay, so what was the path I took in science? We went through a little bit of this, but I'm going to step back a little bit further because I think that this moment in time in 8th grade, when I was told you're not smart enough to do math, you're not smart enough to be a scientist, you're not smart enough, you need to go talk to the boys to figure out how to do your algebra homework, was a real defining moment for me. And so the career path I thought that I was going to be on, based on kind of that confidence diminishing moment in 8th grade, was certainly science was not on the radar for me because I didn't think I was smart enough. And I don't know how many other people have had that moment or something like that. But reflecting back on that moment, it took a little while to build up the confidence, but I do think I'm smart enough to do the things that I have been doing. So anyway, so I went to Middlebury, as Amelia mentioned, where I thought that I was going to be a poli-sci major and do international politics and economics, which in kind of this very full circle way I did end up doing. But instead, I took environmental geology and found myself in a cow paddy doing or a cow field, contouring a field and thinking this is pretty cool. You get to be outside, you get to do things, and for those of you who are geoscientists amongst us, you know, we have this capacity to think at really large scales and really long time frames, and it turns out that my brain was just really hardwired to think that way, and that geology was a really natural pathway for me. Plus, there was the promise of getting to go to a continent that I did not think I wanted to go to, which was Antarctica, and this idea that you could spend time on ships, and all of that seemed like a really cool way to do things, and could be a good way, could be a good career. And the other thing that really got me jazzed about science at that time was that the Greenland ice core records had been published while I was in school, and they really showed that the climate was changing and that it was caused by humans. And that was something that I thought was going to be probably one of the biggest deals that existed, and I wanted to work on that. And so the advice I was given at Middlebury was so much easier to work on policy issues if you have a hard science degree. I'll probably give you different advice if you ask me that question. But so I decided to go on the path and really become an expert in climate science, and through the lens specifically of paleoceanography. All right, so the question was, you can be a scientist. I didn't know that. And it turns out I managed to get an undergraduate degree in this, despite my 8th grade teacher telling me I was not smart enough. So then I went on to get my master's degree, and that was a really tough experience. And at the end of that experience, I thought, I don't want to be a scientist anymore. And so I'm not going to belabor that point, but you know, we all have these moments during, I think, our academic training, or at least I did, where we question, was this the right pathway for me? And then I had an opportunity to go to Boston University, and so I've put in, you can be a scientist, in with exclamation points, because I got really excited about science again. And I got to go to Antarctica for the first time. I got to go 4 times total before I left academia, and got to go to sea. I got to spend time on the continent, and I got a PhD, which was also a pretty big deal, it turns out. So then I have a PhD, and the big question is, now what? For those of you, Amelia mentioned I worked with Rick Murray. When Rick recruited me to come to BU, I told him I didn't want a career in academia, and he was okay with that. But at the time I finished my PhD, there just wasn't a really clear pathway for people who didn't want to stay in academia. So I kind of had to put this together by myself. And so what I've really liked seeing in the, I'm going to say this, 18 years since I finished my PhD, is that there's so many more interdisciplinary programs, and there's so many more pathways for students to explore other interests where they can apply their science in a professional context. So I didn't really figure that out when I finished. So what I did while I figured it out was just go do a postdoc. And I will admit I was not completely serious about the postdoc. I have not published that much. But I did get to go to sea, and I did learn how to surf. And I did get to go back to Antarctica. So all of those things represented a really great, I guess it was, I think the next slide is going to say this, 18 months that I spent in California, kind of rediscovering what fun was after my PhD. And so I'm still at the point 18 months later of, okay, so I'm still a scientist, now what? And I think that then moves me along to a career path here where I went into science program management. And the reason I did that is because that's the job I could get. You know, it was that Hobart trip actually. Happened to be at a what would we do at a port call party where the director of the ocean drilling program was there, and I had a conversation with him, and I stuck in his mind. And about a year later at AGU, saw him, and we had a beer, and he said, "Do you have a job?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I have an assistant director position available, and you should apply for it." And that put me on the path out of my postdoc into science program management. And I'll get into the details, but I worked for the ocean drilling program for a number of years. And then I also worked for the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation as a program officer. And about 10 years about 10 years for doing science program management, I thought about, is this really what I wanted to be doing? I got this PhD. I was concerned about climate change. And what I really wanted to do was be part of the decision-making process and use my scientific expertise to help inform the decisions that were being made that influenced really the US response and the global response to overcoming the challenges associated with climate change. So that moved me into a career in science policy, where I still am. All right, so as I mentioned, science program management, I worked for the ocean drilling program, I worked for the domestic program, and then I worked for the international program. I haven't even been tracking, so somebody else can correct me, but I worked for IODP Management International, which at the time was based in Japan, but had a Washington office. But doing high-level scientific program management and getting skills and convening meetings and negotiating and just learning how not to be exactly a scientist, but how to get those professional skills and going to the workplace and interacting with people in a different way than you would sometimes in an academic environment. From there, I made my first really big switch into philanthropy, and there was a job advertised for a program officer in the Marine Microbiology Initiative at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. For those of you who are earth scientists, you know that as I mentioned, we think in really global timescales, and global kind of spatial and temporal aspects, we just think bigger, and microbiology and as opposite from that as you can be. And so I got to the foundation, and I was handed a proposal on my first day, and I was reading it, and I just asked the question, what is an rRNA? And their pins dropped when they realized that they hired somebody who knew nothing about marine microbiology. And I was immediately enrolled at Berkeley, where I had to take cellular biology, followed by microbiology. And but had to stretch my mind in a way that I had never done before since my PhD. And this was a really pivotal moment in my career, because what I learned is that our brains are really pliable and you can learn new things. And that gave me the confidence transitioning from geosciences to the life sciences, gave me a breadth of knowledge that has served me really well in the policy space. So I really wanted to just spend a tiny bit of time on that choice right there. Again, at the end of my time at the Moore Foundation, I just thought I really want to be part of the decision-making process. And so the best way for me to do that at that stage of my career was to apply for a AAAS Science and Technology Fellowship. I applied for a congressional fellowship, and the Geological Society of America sponsored me and selected me as their congressional fellow. So I was really, really fortunate. I ended up placing with the Senate Energy Committee because at the time we were not talking about climate change in the policy world, but we were talking about energy policy and how a transition to a clean energy economy would help us overcome some of the climate challenges. From there, I continued on the AAAS path and went to State Department, where I worked for the Bureau of Energy Resources in my first year of my fellowship, and then transitioned to Ocean, Environment, and Scientific Affairs. So I worked there on energy issues, and then I worked on freshwater, international freshwater issues, and then I worked on ocean and fisheries issues. And so, and in every single one of those cases is because I had an earth science degree that I was able to easily transition between energy policy, freshwater policy, and ocean policy. And so I really credit my geoscience degree with providing me the flexibility in the policy space to take on just about any energy and environmental policy issue. From there, I was offered a one-year position at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where my portfolio was energy, freshwater, and ocean. So all my favorite subjects. That one-year fellowship ended, and I found myself unemployed, not for the first time in my life. So, but I managed to get picked up on a political appointment at the Department of the Interior for the last 6 months of the Obama administration, where I worked for the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which is the offshore oil and gas regulator. That was a new bureau that came out of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And one of the reasons I was hired, this is true, is because women with PhDs can be considered intimidating for some people in the oil industry. And so they saw that as an asset, which for the first time in my life, being a woman with a PhD was specifically described as an asset in this space, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so I'm sharing that with you. Okay, so my career path also, I think when I think through what kind of got me through each one of these spaces was doing my PhD doing all of my schooling was actually kind of a mind over matter and required a lot of tenacity on my part to get through the PhD. And I think that's because the scientific rigor, I loved the research, but I knew that the academic profession was not going to be the right path for me. Moving into the scientific program management, that was all luck, but gave me a number of the skills that I needed to then move into the policy space, which everything I've done since then has been with intent. This is the thing that I want to do next, and this is how I'm going to do it, because everything else before that has given me the skills I need to be able to make the choices to do the things that I want to do now. Okay, so after the Obama administration, I put this up because, like I said, I found myself unemployed for the third time. And it was really hard because I think many of you are probably in this space where you are where I was 18 years ago, saying, I'm a scientist, now what? In this case, I was policy professional without a job, and I thought, I don't know what I want to do now because I finally am doing exactly what I want to do. And so that was a struggle for me, and it took me about a year to figure out what was the right pathway for me after doing the career of my dreams, to figure out how do you segue into something different. And so that was a time period where I leaned on the consulting. I started teaching at Georgetown, and I was doing just a lot of job searching and a lot of interviewing. which leads me to my current career, which is as an ocean advocate. So it's kind of policy adjacent. We try to influence policy, but that's been really difficult right now. We're mostly in a reactionary space when it comes to protecting our ocean and ensuring a healthy ocean in the policy space. So I'm the aquarium's first director of ocean policy, which means I got to stand up the program all on my own. I got to figure out what our priorities are. The aquarium space has become really influential in policy, and now there are probably 6 or 7 aquariums that have policy directors and we're working together to advance a healthy ocean agenda. And so these are just some of the topics that I work on any given day, week, month, year, with climate change being the primary one. But we also address marine protected areas, endangered species, and particularly the North Atlantic right whale, because the New England aquarium scientists have been studying that specific species for 40 years now. Offshore energy, we oppose any offshore oil and gas development in the Atlantic, but we are very pro-wind. The need for ocean planning and the scientific basis of that. We look at plastic pollution and marine debris and try to prevent that. We advocate for sustainable fisheries, and then as a sidebar, because the aquarium is one of the most science-heavy aquariums in the country, I think we publish the second most number of peer-reviewed papers annually, and I need to look it up, but it might be the Smithsonian who's ahead of us. Is because we have such a core of ocean science. And that is the basis for everything that we do. I advocate to make sure that the ocean science enterprise in America is strongly funded. Okay, so getting to marketable skills. These are not science specific, but communications is the key for me. And writing has been fundamental to everything that I do. And that started at Middlebury, where they have a strong writing focus, but really at the University of Rhode Island is where I took a technical writing. And I have leaned on that in the most, it is so profound and it is so fundamental to what I do. So writing, being able to write in different media is really important. So right now I'm doing a lot of op-eds, which is different from writing memos and talking points for principals in the US government, which is different from writing, actually just wrote a policy paper that we're pitching right now. So different types of writing. Speaking, I think all of you are learning that, but being able to translate on the fly from the deep science knowledge to how does this apply to a larger issue like a policy question. And then something that I am now just stretching and learning is speaking to the media. As a US government representative, we were not encouraged to do that. I did that usually not for attribution and on deep background, but now I'm out in front of the media representing the aquarium and having to be able to come up with the right messaging and staying on point. And speaking on behalf of the aquarium has been a new challenge for me. And for those of you who are in a position to do that, I encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. I gave a nod to being a generalist. You know, I'm a paleoceanographer. I haven't actually leaned on my paleoceanography degree since I left Stanford. So having that ability to think on whole, what does my degree represent, and being able to use that. And as I alluded to earlier, I've been able to move from energy to freshwater to the ocean because I'm an earth scientist as a whole, and was able to step away from, while my PhD is in this, my whole education has brought a different skill set that has been really relevant to policy space. Network and networking is something that has developed over time, and that's somewhat linked to the reputation one I put. And the reputation comes from delivering what you say you're going to say when you say you're going to do it. So delivering on your promises helps you to develop the network of people that you can lean on because you have supported their efforts, and in turn they're willing to support yours. So and in the policy space, the network is the key. If you don't know the answer to somebody, being able to reach out to somebody and say, what do I need to know on this? in 5 minutes is really, really important. So I think that might be my last slide. Oh, here it is. This is a postcard I have on my refrigerator, just as a reminder that it's okay to take risks. It's okay not to know what's next, and that sometimes, regardless, as I mentioned way back in the beginning, that I went to Middlebury and became where I started as an international politics and economics major, that over time, even though I chose to go science, in the end, I came all the way back around and I'm actually doing international science policy, focused on really protecting the planet for future generations. So that's what I have, and so I will look to all of you, and I really want to have a fruitful and productive conversation with you and answer as many questions as I can to help you think through how to make choices in your own careers. And I'm really looking forward to looking at other people too. So I think somebody can direct me. What happens next? Do I stop sharing?
Hey,
Hi.
yeah, so you can stop sharing your screen, and then if people want to turn on their cameras, they're welcome to, or we can just wait until you ask a question, someone asks a question. But what I'd like to hear, we have Kelly here, and I'm choking on my own spit apparently. But we'd just like to have a conversation. So I know that there are a lot of students out there who have been thinking about professional development, maybe have taken Maya's class or are taking it, and there are relevant things coming up in this talk. Or maybe there's a student who's about to set out on their own and has a few questions for Kelly. So why don't we just try to make this as unorganized as possible, and just a free-for-all. Turn on your cameras, raise your hands, ask questions of Kelly. Anyone want to start? Hey, Catherine. Catherine's one of my students.
Hi, Catherine.
I really appreciated your talk. I think that I'm probably not the only person here who could relate to a lot of the things you brought up. I had an 8th grade teacher that made me cry, Ms. Iskin, in math. And I'm at the end of my master's now, and I have had those moments where I'm like, oh man, I'm done with science. And sorry, Amelia, that's no offense. I think it's natural. But yeah, so I'm going on after this to a job with NSF. So I am going to start kind of entering into the policy realm. And I think that's something that I'm been nervous about or thinking about, is how to take my very detail-oriented, obsessive mind and completely learn new projects and shift it to a totally different sort of culture. I guess the culture clash is a thing that I'm worried about. I'm wondering if you could speak on that at all. I guess I mean, it's a lot to ask you to go back to thinking what it was like to get out of the academic mind and into this policy mind. But because I'm entering that, I'm curious to hear what you think.
It's such a good question. I think that because I knew that I think that my brain was already hardwired to be kind of science adjacent. And so my commitment was always a little questionable on the science side. And I think I'm the most surprised person that I finished a PhD in the end. And not only that I did 2 more years as a postdoc. But some of the choices I've made have been trade-offs. I really wanted to go on that cruise with Amelia, and so I traded away 2 years of postdoc to do that. But let's see. So you're an earth scientist.
The honesty.
Yeah. I'm pretty honest. Let's see. I think because of my somewhat lack of commitment, it was easy for me to let go and really, but scientifically, I'm very curious too. So I think allowing my brain to say, you're going to do this next, and you're going to get really smart on it. And that this is what you're going to be an expert in now. And that helps because there's so even though I now refer to myself as a generalist, I have now the things that I've worked on, I have had to get, and this is policy speak to say, I have to get really smart on this fast. Okay. And so the skills you learn as a scientist allow you to parse through a great deal of information and pick out the key pieces. But the key for policy is being able to let go enough to say, I don't know everything, but I know enough to make a recommendation. And even if I don't, instinctually, I should be able to. And so, good. Yeah, policy is made an imperfect information. And it should be. We're never going to have all the answers to all the questions that policymakers are going to ask scientists. If I just had this definitive amount of information, we would be able to make the policy. That's just never going to be the case. So getting everybody to a place where they're comfortable, this is the best information that we have. Therefore, we can make a decision. And I think that the earth scientists in particular are really good at balancing that, because we can see into the future a little bit further than a lot of people. And understand how the interlinkages of, if you do this, you can kind of anticipate some of the cascading impacts that might come from a policy decision or a scientific decision. So I think it's embedded in me, but there's also this ability to just step back and say, I don't actually need to know everything.
That's great. That's something I definitely struggle with. Amelia can speak to that. But thank you.
Okay, great question, Catherine. Brianna, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. So my question was, you mentioned networking, which I know is incredibly important. And so I wanted to know kind of what were kind of the most useful kind of arenas for you in that. Where were you kind of meeting the most people and in the most meaningful ways that, led to, more long-term relationships, I guess, other than graduate school?
You can't say the bar, Kelly.
The bar? That was the start. The Frank Rock connection was based in 2 bars. So I think it changes as your career changes. So one thing that scientists who are in policy are really used to getting calls or connections to, hey, there's somebody who would like to talk. And so if we were in person, you would reach out and say, do you have time for a coffee? And we would go get a coffee, and I would basically tell you what I just told you right now. And then try to think, if you have a specific interest, I would try to think of 2 extra people you could talk to and start building your network. But in the case, I think the network really comes from who you've been working with. So when I came out of grad school, my network was a bunch of scientists, people that I collaborated with, people that I had sailed with, people that I was in school with. And that was it, because that was the range of my existence, right? And then I went into science policy management, and my orbit got a little bigger. And the people that I thought were really important at that time, were still scientists. And so, but they were doing different things with their science degrees. And so, and again, that's where professionally delivering came to be important, because if you go to a professional networking thing, or there are people who say, oh, you should put this in your calendar and you should reach out to all of these people every quarter. That never happens. Nobody has ever reached out to me quarterly to say, hey, just checking in. And I don't do it. But reputationally, if you have worked well with somebody, if you have delivered on what you said you were going to deliver, and those people will be still on call for you, and I'm on call for them. So when people reach out to me and say, I need a favor, I do the favor. And that has served me in the best possible way. And then the Moore Foundation changed my network fundamentally, because I was exposed to an entirely different sector, different science, different the foundation space, we network amongst each other, especially on science funding. And then policy, it's the same. Whoever you're exposed to, whoever you're working with, whoever is in your social network becomes the group of people. So, I have colleagues right now. One of my good friends from my fellowship time, she works for this organization called Sciline, which is connecting scientists to journalists, and her network is not as she's an astrophysicist. And so when she needs a neuroscientist, she reaches out to me and is like, who does deep sea volcanology? I'm like, oh, my ex-roommate did that. So we string it all together based on who we know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Michael first, and then Savannah.
There we go. I'm really scratchy on this side. Sorry if it's coming across poorly, but thank you for coming and giving the talk to us. It sounds like at the beginning of your talk, you have multiple hats that you may be wearing at any given time, either individually or all together. So just out of curiosity, out of all those different things that you do on a regular basis, are there any that you prefer over another, or is there anything that you dread, or does it change from time to time depending on what you're working on?
Yes. And I will say one of the things that has happened to me since leaving science is that I often describe myself as having the attention span of a gnat. I no longer have that singular focus. And today, I waited till the last minute. I have still not given up on procrastinating from my high school days. There was a public comment period. It's due today. Still haven't submitted it. On proposal to allow specific types of deterrents for marine mammals from becoming entangled in fishing gear, but really it's about using seal bombs and shooting seals with paintballs. And I just didn't want to write it because I'm tired of writing about horrible things that are happening to the ocean. So I struggle sometimes with saying, okay, I got to dig in and do this. So I right now dread proposals to change our environmental regulations. That is a now moment. That 2 years ago, that's not at all what I would have dreaded. But what I do like is that I learned a lot about the Marine Mammal Protection Act because I haven't, despite being an ocean policy professional, I have not actually read the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and I still didn't read it, but I know a lot more about it because I worked on it. And so that speaks to the being able to get smart on something without actually knowing exactly what you're talking about at all moments in time. So I think, so yeah, let's see, my favorite hat to wear is, and Michael, you'll have to tell me if I missed any of your questions, because as I mentioned, I have the attention span of a gnat. My favorite hat it also changes. I tend to be really happy in the moment. And what I really love right now is doing ocean policy. But when I left the administration, I really had to sit down and say, okay, do I want to apply for energy jobs, or do I want to apply for freshwater jobs, or do I want to go back to my roots and do ocean policy? And I settled on ocean policy, but every once in a while, I wonder if what I should be working on is something different. And so unclear. And I think, right now I'm focused on Tuesday and however long it takes, because that's going to change as I've been trying to prepare the people I work with. What's going to happen after Tuesday for people like me is that we are going to be in an all-out, in the event that the administration flips, this is what happens policy-wise. You've got a 90-day period where the current administration tries to push through every single policy that they didn't do in the 4 years. And as part of the Obama administration, we did it too, only we knew we were ending. We just didn't know if we were going to be transitioning. And so every single regulation that didn't get across the finish line needs to get across the finish line. So we're going to be in a full-on defense mode assuming we don't agree with those regulations. There might be some that we like, but maybe not. And then we will also be in this proactive mode of trying to move all of the ocean policies that we wish had happened in the past 4 years. So it'll be a split focus for 90 days. And then if the administration stays the same, we will continue at the same pace of wait and see what happens and deal with it in the moment.
All right, thank you. That was a really concise answer. Maybe that's not the right word. I don't know. That was.
Did you get
address my question? Thank you.
Did I answer everything?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Wide-ranging may have been the word.
Yeah.
Freewheeling. Thorough.
That's
Okay,
me.
Savannah.
Hi, Kelly. That was a really great talk. I absolutely loved it. I really, really resonate with everything that you talked about. I sometimes have the attention of a gnat. Like, I'm a really good starter, but sometimes it seems to kind of go off the rails. But you talked early. I have so many questions, but I'm really going to try and limit it to a couple so I don't take up everyone's time. But I'm really, really interested. You talked earlier about you're honest. How honest are you actually during your interviews? Do you actually talk about how you're kind of a jack of all trades? Has anyone ever accused you of being like a master of none? Like, I know me, myself, someone has said that I tend to focus on too many things, and I like to call myself a Renaissance researcher. How honest are you, and how do you portray yourself to get these different positions? Because I'm also really interested in ocean policy and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, so it's easier now than it was for me because I deliver. I have a reputation now that people understand who I am, what I represent in the policy space. And so I don't think that I think now for me, it's an asset to not be a specialist in the policy space. What I have struggled with is that people don't think I can keep a job for much more than a year. And so I have moved, I have changed jobs a lot, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes by choice. And sometimes as I mentioned, I have found myself unemployed several times due to circumstances outside of my control. But specifically in Washington, I had this stretch, 1 year fellowship, 1 year fellowship, 1 year. And for people who haven't worked in Washington, they don't understand always, especially New England Aquarium, I'll tell you. People have worked there for 30, 40 years. This is not a job that they ever leave. So the fact that I have come and gone from so many jobs, I have in fact had to answer the question many times, if we hire you, are you going to stay? And my answer is, I don't know. I am willing to stay if I'm happy, and I'm willing to stay if I'm challenged. And if those two things remain constant, I'm happy to stay. And so I've been at the aquarium for about 3 years. So I think that I've now crushed that assumption that I can't do a job for much more than a year, but 3 years is still short on many people's timelines. So I think that that's been my challenge in overcoming, is defending the choices I've made to stay employed. And if you're in Washington, that's not a question you get, but outside of Washington, it's definitely been something that has raised eyebrows.
Do you think that you would have still had problems with not being able to keep a job if you hadn't been in the executive, like working under the Obama administration, working in Capitol Hill? You probably would have had the same issues.
Sure. I think that there's just a lot of movement in Washington. People are opportunistic. They're ambitious, and so they move to get to those higher levels. And I think it's very common, and it's just not a question I would have gotten in Washington. And in fact, I think that is celebrated, the ability to be opportunistic and entrepreneurial in the professional environment, given how hard it is to kind of get some of those jobs, and to find people who are willing to fund you for those jobs. Because I was never a civil servant, but I worked for the government in a variety of different mechanisms. So it was creative employment for all that time. And so going back to a much more traditional model of employment was, I think, the question that I was facing leaving the administration.
All right, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay, Alex, are you next? Catherine?
I think I was before Kat,
You
but
are.
so anyways, I was curious. You had mentioned at one point early on in your talk how you were kind of surprised when you first kind of moved towards the more policy stuff, how they saw having, a PhD as a woman especially was, was maybe the first time you had seen that as being an advantage. I know having a higher degree nowadays is definitely seen as more of an advantage in many places. But I was kind of curious, aside from with the policy stuff, are there certain types of jobs and things that you're seeing that they're having preferences for people to have these higher degrees? Yeah, I guess just how's that changed also too over the course of your career at least?
Yes. So I didn't answer this specific question, even though I put it on one of my front slides. Every job I've applied to has required a PhD. Not every job I have done needed the PhD. And so I think it's a status, but I know that I can think of two friends who and now maybe three who have master's degrees and have just as much experience in program management and doing the types of work that I did, that have now found themselves limited by the fact that they can't move up because the requirements for some of these jobs are PhDs, whether or not you need it or not. So I would say that the two jobs I had with the ocean drilling program, no way I needed a PhD to do those. Absolutely needed a PhD at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. If I didn't have that fundamental knowledge of how to learn science and how to think critically, I never would have been able to transition from earth science to marine microbiology in the time frame required. And I'm actually really proud of the grants I made in the end at the Moore Foundation, because by the time I left, I could see that my instincts on understanding marine microbiology had developed to the point where I think I made some really good grants there, and I'm really proud of it. It's kind of funny, in the federal government, PhD was always required, but every place I was doing the exact same type of policy, there were civil servants who didn't have PhDs who were also doing very similar jobs. So there's paths into the policy space where and the science policy space where you don't need to have a PhD to do it. And then I would say at New England Aquarium only would the PhD be required, but most of my policy the policy directors at the other aquariums, one other at Seattle has a PhD. But only because the amount of science that's happening at New England Aquarium and the number of scientists we have doing research in the field makes it imperative that the policy, I think, that the policy director needs to have a really solid grounding in science so that they're representing the science and informing the decision making using that science. And because we just do so much of that scientific research, it at New England Aquarium is really imperative. So me hello. So okay, I lost my train of thought because Yampa walked in. I'm sorry. So was it Alex?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've mostly answered my question. I was just kind of curious, about kind of how the status of having a master's versus PhD nowadays is going, because I know the trend has kind of been, from what I understand from other people I've asked about this, it's been back and forth, I know, over the years about, what level of degree is suggested for certain types of jobs. So
yeah, I think so. The advice I was given, if you don't really love the subject of your PhD, or if you're not really 100% dedicated, don't get the PhD. And I think I have switched on my advice there, which is the PhD has been invaluable for everything I have decided to do, and I have never regretted having it. It has opened doors that I did not anticipate it opening. And so even though I'm not a scientist, that's one of the best decisions I made was finishing the terminal degree.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering my question. Yeah, it's nice to hear that last comment, I have to say. But thank you, and I'll let you move on to other people's questions.
Sure.
Catherine, I think I saw your hand first, and then Mark Luther.
Yeah, Alex, thanks for asking that question. I think all of us master students who are interested in policy are always curious what the climate is. I have two questions, but I was wondering, because you said you're presenting right now from Phoenix, but your job is based in New England. So do you see, and you've talked about like moving around a lot for these jobs, and I know personally going into NSF, they've said like, you know, Washington, D.C. is a really expensive place to live. You don't have to rush to move here because of COVID. I'm wondering if you see like a shift in the way work is done in your kind of work in terms of like the virtual side of it. I mean, obviously networking, I'm also curious like how networking can be pulled off via teleconferences, if you see it being a real like challenge. Hopefully this isn't like a very period of our lives, but I'm wondering if you think that this could change like the work climate at all.
Yeah, let's see. In June, I made the decision to flee Boston. I just no longer saw any point in being there. And my friends are in California, and I love the mountains and the outside. So I'm actually based in Colorado right now. I came down to Arizona to I'm volunteering as a poll watcher this week. So so they needed watchers in Arizona, and that was drivable, and my family lives here, so so that was an easy decision. But I've really been taking advantage of this ability that I have a car and I can go anywhere. And that has kept me a little bit saner during this time. I miss people, and that's really a remarkable thing for me to say, because I'm an introvert. But I'm over this. And I think that the networking I've done on conferences has been really difficult for me. But what I have learned is that because of what we do in the work that I do, there was a good 3-month period where I was not doing any ocean policy. I was doing stimulus and relief funding, lobbying hard, and on behalf of the aquarium, because we lost 80% of our revenue. We have gone through 3 layoffs. I'm grateful every day that I still have a job. We've lost 42% of our staff at this point, and so. Is
that related to the COVID, to having to close down facilities?
Yeah. Yeah, and even though we are open, we are only open to 25% of our typical capacity. So we are not generating the amount of revenue that it takes to care for 20,000 animals a day, plus the humans who care for those animals, or in my position, we're adjacent to the other things. But being a policy professional meant that I was asked to pivot on a dime and learn everything there was to know about small business administration, to learn to read a 1,500-page bill on what was in the CARES Act and what could be applied to a nonprofit and how we could take advantage of resources that were available. So that's another example of needing to be agile. But to the networking question, what ended up happening when we switched to relief funding is I was no longer in the ocean policy space, but I started working with the local Chamber of Commerce, the American Association of Museums. My network expanded through the work that I did with other groups that we wouldn't necessarily be partnering with at all times. And so that's been really rewarding, is that I actually have made new work colleagues, despite the fact that we're not in the same room. And the fact that as we've all contracted and our capacity is diminished, we have started leaning on each other in different ways. So I lean on my partners, my professional colleagues at the other aquariums. We are all picking up each other's slack as we can. So if I can write the comment for somebody and they can take it for their aquarium, we do that for each other right now. So it's been really important, and that support network has been really key to allowing us to keep our eye on the ball right now.
Okay.
Anyway, at the moment, I really prefer if people ask me, do you have time for a call? That way I can I don't have to be on camera. And but we're still doing that, as people are reaching out to me and saying, I've got a really great undergraduate who's finishing. Can you offer her some advice? And we're all still doing that, just in a different format.
Well, I hope for the best for the aquarium and a speedy recovery, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually I want to go back to that master's question, because I wish somebody had given me this advice. With a master's, you guys have the option to skip everything that I did and go straight for Knaus. So AAAS fellowships do not, the threshold is a PhD. Knaus is not. And so if you want to go into federal service or transition, you actually can. And the federal government is one of the places where you don't have to have a PhD, as I mentioned, to do the work.
Could you spell that, please? Knaus?
Yeah, the Knaus is Sea Grant Fellowships. So
okay.
Knaus is Knauss.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, there have been a bunch of emails going around about the latest offering of Knaus fellowships. So
yeah, so you can skip. Oh, and somebody just put it in the chat. And that would have circumvented, I don't know, a decade of my life. So So I do want to mention that it's just because it's not part of my career path, doesn't mean that it is a totally viable option that can get you the experience you need and start building your network to do the types of things you want to do without a PhD.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay,
why don't you let the students go first, Amelia?
Okay, Jennifer? You're okay.
Yep. Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for this awesome talk. I'm definitely, a lot of what you said has resonated with me, with my very untraditional background and my interests.
My students.
Yes, and I'm Dr. Luther's student, so so Mark knows all about me, and I definitely have a very unique background, and I have an art and science background, and part of some of the things that you had said, I was just very excited to hear it from somebody else, just some of the obstacles and moving forward and having people in a job position, question your ability because you're not laser focused on one, research question. And I have definitely been in that position. I'm curious to know, in your job pursuing, throughout the years, have you come into any obstacles where, I know in my experience, I've had come to meet people who don't have that much, or I should say, tend to push back a little bit if you haven't had that laser pointed, direction and whatnot. And, for myself, I don't even know if I want to pursue a career in academia, and I see myself somewhere more along the lines in a museum setting at some point. But I'm just curious as to how you feel about that. And, I think the more people I meet, the more colorful their background is. And I'm feeling that I see that more in younger people having to go out and get jobs and having to be more savvy and hustle a little bit more. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I'm probably the poster child for people pushing back against every choice I've made. I remember at BU, a professor after I got the postdoc at Stanford actually telling me, "Oh, you're way smarter than I thought you were." And I just thought, I'm already exhausted, but I'm exhausted by the assumptions and the need to fit into some set of criteria by which we succeed. Yeah. And like I said, I think, I'm at a point in my life where now I am in a position to make decisions with intent. But it took a really long time, and it was not without me making some poor decisions, but also me just falling on my face, and but learning in all cases and having enough humor to say, you know what, that was a total fail, and moving on. But each one of those moments has been really definitive too. And I think I no longer take things seriously. I just don't, because except some work things. I take some work things very seriously. But overall, you know, I take risks because I have enough experience to know now that it's not the end of the world if it doesn't work out. And that you will have learned something, and you will have met new people, and all of that gives you the fortitude and the confidence to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So,
you know, and I also
I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. It's really nice to have somebody in a very similar situation and making choices based not on you know, a traditional pathway. I you know, I could say for myself that part of the reason why I decided to get a PhD is that I feel you do have the freedom to really kind of formulate what you want to end up doing, and having that freedom, especially if you don't have a laser pointed focus, could be really beneficial in the long run.
I think you have a lot more clarity at your stage than I did at your stage, knowing that you know, I was going to take a winding path for about 10 years while I figured out what that laser focus was.
Right.
And as I mentioned, I lost my laser focus a couple times, even now. And so I anticipate that to keep happening to me.
Yeah.
As I think, well, I've changed careers about every 10 years. What's next? So, you know, what else is out there? What's the new challenge? What else can I do with this set of experiences that I've developed?
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, why don't we go to you, and then I see Catherine's hands up as well, but if anyone else, we're over time now, but maybe Kelly will be nice enough to stick around if some of you guys want to chat a little bit more, but maybe we should...
I have till 5 on my calendar, so I'm good.
Maybe we can release people who don't want to stick around. That's fine. Thank you guys for hanging out, and then others of us can stick around and just keep raising your hand. So I think Mark is up now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Kelly. It's very interesting. Frank Mueller-Karg and I have been teaching ocean policy here for a number of years, and we're always looking at new ways to turn science into influencing policy. But I'm also chairman of a small public aquarium that's been around for about 32 years. And I've been trying to figure out ways that we can strengthen the relationship between the College of Marine Science and it's called the Pier Aquarium, but it has a strong relationship with the Florida Aquarium and the Clearwater Marine Aquarium here. And I have seen studies where people pay a lot more attention to opinions or policy directives or policy influencing statements that come out of aquariums and zoos and things like that. I guess the question is, do you have any advice on how we as the College of Marine Science might utilize those connections with these local public aquaria to get better science communications out or influence public policy more effectively than we might do just as long-haired, pointy-headed scientists, which I've been called before. I used to have a ponytail back in my younger days.
Oh, let's see. So the reason the aquarium really appealed to me is that aquariums are trusted. They are venerable institutions in their communities, often pillar institutions. In the case of the New England Aquarium, we just celebrated our 51st anniversary, so we've been there for a long time. The New England Aquarium is responsible for the revitalization of the Boston waterfront. We were the first kind of cultural institution that got in that space, and now it's a completely different space. But there were so when I started, I assumed when we were hiring an ocean policy person that the whole organization was on board with the fact that we were going to be doing some advocacy, and that was not true. So there were some internal challenges in what does it mean to advocate, and to stay true to your scientific principles, to how do you navigate that line of we're objective, which we are clearly not. We are not objective, but we are also not partisan. We have a vision, which is to protect the blue planet. And to do that, advocacy is a key, as is the science. And so how do you marry those two things to present information to decision makers to help influence the outcome you're looking for on behalf of the ocean? And so to your point, we partner too with other academic institutions. So even though we have a strong science base, we are very much in the our scientific expertise is on a specific set of ocean science, and that is specifically kind of marine mammals, endangered species, fish, sharks, so wildlife. And so how do we expand the scope of what our knowledge is? And it helps that the aquarium, in this case, hired a climate scientist, because then we can get deeply into climate without having to, we still do, but, so when we look at the Gulf of Maine, Bigelow does really, amazing microbiology. And we've got Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and MIT and Harvard and how could I miss my alma mater, but Boston University and the University of Rhode Island. And so, academically, we are collaborating with those institutions, and where the strength, I think, in that partnership is that the aquarium can get out in front of some issues that maybe an academic institution cannot. We are in a position to advocate. We are in a position to mobilize our visitors. So in a normal year, we would see 1.4 million visitors a year. And so my challenge has been, how do I get them to speak on behalf of our issues? Because it's one thing for me to do it, but it's so much more powerful if I can activate our audience. And part of that activation is educating them. And what we've learned through my 3 years is that people come to the aquarium and they want to be told how they can help the ocean. Well, I can give them that. And so that's how we're working together.
That's great. I could talk to you about this stuff for a long time, but I'll let other people talk.
Anytime, and we can take it to a different channel at some point too.
Excellent. Okay, I see Jennifer's hand up. Is there anybody else who hasn't asked a question, who's thinking about it? Kelly is probably one of the least scary people that I've ever met, or the most, I don't know. But if you have a question, definitely raise your hand. I know that we are staying a little bit late, but there's a lot of great stuff here. Anybody? They're all burned out. Kelly, you've killed them all. Oh, Eddie.
Okay, I have not been tracking the chat, and I'm sorry about that. So if stuff has come up in there, I've seen them, but I haven't read them. So
I kind of have.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Eddie, I think you're on. Are you?
I am. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Kelly. Kelly, terrific talk, by the way.
Thanks.
I'm a part-time PhD student and a consultant, so this really resonated, and had two questions for you. The first, generally easy, just when were you at your URI, GSO?
95 to 98.
Okay, I think we might have just overlapped. I was in Jeremy Colley's lab, so go Roadies. So.
Sure, I was in Ken Ron. Look, I couldn't even tell you the title of my PhD at this point.
All good.
But I finished in Ken Ron's lab.
Gotcha. And I was just curious when you'd mentioned having the consulting firm, but you hadn't worked in the private sector. What were you doing as a consultant? I guess you were mainly working for the government. How did that go?
Yeah, actually, the one contract I still maintain is and this goes to the writing skills. I'm a technical editor for the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board. I help scientists write really technical stuff into something that's a little bit more digestible because their audience is policymakers. And geoscience is really key for nuclear waste. So that's the one contract I maintain right now. But I have been very opportunistic on the consulting, and people have asked why I don't do it full time, and it's because I don't like marketing myself, and I actually don't have a really good target. I take the contracts that are available to me. So in that space, the most active I was with the consulting was in between the Obama administration and the aquarium, and I think I had 5 or 6 running contracts going. I was helping with fundraising for one of the scientific societies because I had the Moore Foundation background, and while I do not have a great deal of experience writing grants, I have a great deal of experience funding grants, and I know what to look for in a successful grant. So I was doing some fundraising. The Consortium for Ocean Leadership hired me for an ONR grant they did to do an ocean science assessment. So I was doing some assessment work. Let's see, I was doing the technical editing, and then I was working with a group called Conservation X Labs on a potential ocean project that they wanted to do. So it was very opportunistic, and the opportunities came out. And I think that this was kind of reputationally, the network sometimes steps in to keep you afloat. And I think that that's what really happened in the time frame that I was trying to sort out what was next for me, because every single one of those came through the network who said, you're available, we have work. Wow. And in the absence of that, I don't have contracts coming at me right now. So, but I don't have the capacity to take them either.
Certainly.
Well, does that answer your question?
It sure does. I really appreciate the talk and your perspective, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers.
Frank, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hello everybody. Good afternoon. It's kind of getting kind of late, but I had a question, Kelly, and maybe you talked about it, but in many cases you find yourself in a job or in a situation where you are trying to change policy or to bring ideas to the table where the policy environment is just totally not what you're in agreement with. So how do you work that through, or do you stay in that job? Do you change jobs? Do you just throw the papers up into the air? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's super easy if you're working for the government in the roles that I work. So it's different if you're a civil servant and you're committed to working on behalf of the American people, no matter the administration. But because I was political, and I worked for the Senate, I worked for the Democrat from New Mexico. So it's one of the few places in the world you can really plant and fly your partisan flag, because they expect you to. So you don't. So in the case of, and we give this advice to every single fellow who comes in through the science and policy programs. A lot of fellows come in and say, I think I can have more impact if I work for an office that doesn't align with my values. I think I can convince them that science is the way to go here. And that has never, ever, ever been true. And it is just a recipe for misery. And those offices don't want you either. So that they understand that the way that they're going to get their agenda done is not by fighting with their own staff. So you are going to be happy and productive if you are choosing ahead of time. And in Washington, it's really easy to determine who's with you and who's not. And that's true for all sides of the coin. That's true for the think tanks. It's true for the government. It's true for Congress. So So our advice to incoming fellows is always pick the office that is doing the work that you are most excited about, because then you're going to get stuff done. And that carries through into the work that I did with the administration, and why I'm no longer with the administration, is that transition is not allowed. In fact, there were specific rules for people like me that we were not allowed to even apply for civil servant jobs and stay with the government, because they don't want people to what we call burrow in, so that mindset that we were carrying through Obama administration policies into the next administration would not have been something that was encouraged.
So wait, is there no deep state? There's no deep state? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, not from the political infrastructure. But you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but there were many things that I celebrated early on as different scientists really put to light some of the scientific integrity questions that I think as a scientist writ large, whether or not I worked for the government or not, have had concerns about is what is happening to science in the federal government. What is the role of scientists? Can we are scientists allowed to speak freely? Does that answer your question, Frank?
Well, if I were an intern, yeah. But,
I can dive deeper.
Later in life, things are different.
Yeah, well, the AAAS Fellowship, and one of the reasons I really appreciate it, and it's a difference with the Knaus Fellowship, is the AAAS Fellowship allows you to come in at any stage of your career. And so a number of the congressional fellows that came in my class were actually had recently retired, and so this was a transition into retirement. A number of those were nuclear engineers, and that's very common. And some of the physicians and veterinarians who are part of the program come in at much later states in their career. And I think in many cases, I would say that those people cut to the chase faster. They know how to get it done. So I celebrate the AAAS program for encouraging people at all stages in their career to participate in the public policy process. The difference, and I alluded to this, Knaus, and because I didn't do it, I can't speak to it, but you have to come in a certain number of months after your degree has ended, and then you are not allowed to apply after that period has passed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So I think that we should probably let Kelly go. And if you guys all want to turn on your microphones in a second and just thank Kelly. This was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, and definitely different than our regular seminar series. But I think there's a lot of value in hearing from a lot of different voices. So we're actually going to have Mike White from Nature give a talk in the next couple of weeks about what it's like to be an editor and what it's like to get all of these papers from Nature and how to be a better writer. So we're doing a couple of these this semester.
And we may be calling on you for a guest lecture in our ocean policy class.
That's my favorite thing. Actually, I hate talking about myself, but I love talking about ocean policy. So anytime.
Okay, so thank you so much, Kelly. It was great to see you. And I wish you were here in person.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
my last wish to all of you is, if you haven't voted, go out and vote.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, and in Florida, we can vote early and often.
Don't do the often part, but definitely do the early part. It's a pleasure meeting all of you. I wish I was there in person myself, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great,
Bye-bye.
Kelly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.